Okay, now let's do some of that smooth modeling, some of that hard surface modeling techniques, and we'll start with the stereo table right here. So select that and press period on the numpad to focus. The first thing you need to do if you want to do smooth surfaces is actually to enable smooth shading. And if you remember, I've shown you on the trees in the episode 2 how that works. So if you press the second mouse button, you can choose if you want to shade flat or smooth. And if you press shade smooth, you can see this doesn't look so good, but basically what this is, the smoothing algorithm tries to interpolate between the faces there and create some smooth transition. And you can of course modify this and create some more complex geometry, and you can see right now the smoothing is much better on the edges there, but still not perfect. And if you want that nice smooth corner there which catches light, you want more complex geometry. And again, as I said, you can do this geometry on your own. So for example, if you add something like a round cube which has a much more complex geometry and shade this smooth, this looks pretty nice because there are a lot more faces to interpolate between. Okay, we can delete this. So the next thing you can do is to use something called subdivision surface. And what that basically does, if you select the table again and add modifier subdivision surface, don't get scared. What this does, it's an algorithm that subdivides your geometry non-destructively, so it's procedural. If you go to the edit mode and switch to the wireframe, you can see how the original object is still the same, but the underlying result of the subdivision modifier is this shape here, which has subdivided faces. And here you can see there is a number of subdivisions to be made, and there are two categories. There is a render and viewport, and as you can guess, it will use the render value for final output in the render, and for the viewport, for the preview purposes, you just use 1. So we can increase this to 2, so you better see what's happening here, and this looks much better now. And if you again switch to the wireframe view, you can see it's the double amount of the subdivisions there. It's much more complex geometry, and the smooth shading looks much better here. So yeah, that's what basically subdivision surface modifier does. And if you want to control the shape that comes out of it, you basically just need to add some more geometry to the underlying object. The subdivision surface works approximately like the curves I explained you before, the Bezier curves. And if you go to the side view and again to the wireframe, and let's edit this, here you can see these are the vertices that the subdivision tries to interpolate between, and this is the resulting shape. If you would modify the geometry to something a little more complex, like adding a loop here, you can see the result of the subdivision changes. And again, if you add some loop here, it changes even further. So basically it takes these control points right here and tries to create a curve between them. Okay, let me go back a few steps. If you want to make this really sharp, you just need to move the loop more to the edge. So if you add a loop and start moving it, you can see how the curve changes here. And again, it's based on these control points, so it basically acts like a Bezier curve. If you would like to make this corner sharper, you can just make a loop here, another one here, and another one here. And basically you have much sharper geometry there. So that's how you can shape the object by using the subdivision surface and geometry. But for the simple object like this, this workflow can be completely non-destructive, because right here this is destructive. We added more geometry into the underlying objects, and it's a little bit harder to manipulate and to change. So if we go back, let's for a second disable the smoothing, so go to the shade flat again, and you can click this viewport icon here to disable the result of the subdivision modifier. And right now we can add another modifier. Let's add a bevel, which you are familiar with basically, and we can move it up a stack. And as you know, these arrows here reorganize the order of the modifiers, and basically they are applied in the order. So if we move it here, the first will be applied the bevel, and the second the subdivision surface will be applied. Okay, so right now we added some bevel here, and we can add segment here. So the bevel modifier has some width option, some segments, and some other things that are pretty similar to the options if you use the bevel tool in the edit mode. So let's just increase the number of segments here. And right away you can see this is a little bit similar geometry that we achieved by adding these loop cuts. So if you go to the wireframe, you can see there's a corner there, and there's one loop cut here, one loop here, and one here. So yeah, that's pretty similar, and this will work fine with the subdivision surface modifier, and we just need to modify the width of this. So if you go down, you can see how it sharpens, and we can go to something like 0.01 with these two segments. And right now let's just enable the subdivision surface and smooth shading. And right away you can see these are very nice smooth shaded corners, which are achieved completely procedurally by adding just the two modifiers without the need to modify the geometry whatsoever. So if you move the vertices around, you still have that nice shading there. And maybe this is still not sharp enough, so I think we can go to something like 0.05, and I think this is a great value to make the corners really sharp as on the wooden table, but not that much to allow the light to reflect on the edges and show even from a larger distance that this is not a completely sharp object. Now let's do the same thing for the table and for the shelves. Throughout the scene, sometimes I will be using this subsurface modifier here and there, and sometimes I will just use the smooth shading or just the really sharp edges. And that's because again, this is the isometric semi-realistic scene. At this level of detail, where the camera is really far from these objects, sometimes it's justified to use this technique. So again, as the light will reflect on these surfaces, you will see these edges there, and it's a really nice effect. But sometimes it will be overdoing, like on these drawers here where there's already a bevel in place, so I don't think we need to modify this any further. And right now I want to do the same thing as on the stereo table, and there's a very simple way to do that. We don't need to repeat the settings again. We just select the table, shift select the stereo table, press Ctrl L to make links, and basically this is the tool to make a linked object similar as if you would auto duplicate them, but you can selectively link other things other than object data and the model. So you can see there's an option to link modifiers, and if you click that, you will basically transfer the modifiers from this object to this. So if you now click the table and zoom in, you can see that this is this has the same modifiers applied, but there is no smooth shading because that's not the modifier. So we will need to right click and shade smooth this as well. And that's for the table. And the same thing, shift select this one, Ctrl L and modifiers. One shelf disappeared because we basically replaced all the modifiers there. So not to worry, just click this, shade it smooth, and add array modifier again, scroll down, it's the last in the stack, and just again modify the X to 0 and Z to 6. And if you want, you can do the same for the likes here. So yeah, let's do that. Ctrl L and link the modifiers. But again, these likes disappeared, so we'll need to add the mirror modifier and check the Y as well. So that's some of that hard surface for that furniture, and I intentionally left these table likes flat shaded because I want to get back to that later. So let's move on to the next chapter, and we'll model other parts of the furniture like the chair and the sofa, and we'll finish up the other details as well.